Picture this. You are sitting on your couch trying to unwind after a long day, and your dog starts barking. Not once, not twice, but over and over again, at what seems like absolutely nothing. You get up, you look around, you see nothing. You sit back down, and it starts again. You have probably been there. And if you are watching this right now, chances are you are dealing with this right now, and it is exhausting you in ways you did not even expect when you first brought your dog home. But here is what I want you to hold on to before we dive into this, and I really need you to hear this clearly. Your dog is not doing this to you. Your dog is not being stubborn. Your dog is not trying to make your life difficult. There is something deeper going on, something your dog is desperately trying to communicate, and the fact that you are here, watching this, already tells me you love your dog enough to want to understand. So stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to see your dog completely differently. And that shift alone might be the most important thing that happens in your relationship with them. Let us start at the very beginning, because most people get this wrong from the first moment the barking starts. When your dog barks excessively, the instinct for almost every owner is to react immediately. You might say, no. You might clap your hands. You might rush over, or in frustrated moments, you might even raise your voice. And here is where most owners go wrong without ever realizing it. Every single one of those reactions is actually a form of attention. And to a dog, attention is attention. Whether it is positive or negative, whether you are laughing or frustrated, the moment you respond, your dog learns something very powerful. Barking works. Barking gets a result. And dogs, more than almost any other animal we have domesticated, are absolute masters at learning what works. This is the foundation you need to understand before anything else makes sense. Dogs do not bark because they are broken. They bark because barking has served them in some way at some point, and their brain has quietly filed that away as a useful tool. The problem is not the barking itself. The problem is what is driving it, and whether that driver is being addressed or accidentally reinforced. Once you understand this, everything changes. Now let us talk about the first and honestly the most commonly misunderstood reason dogs bark excessively, and that is anxiety. Not just nervousness, not just being a little skittish. Actual, genuine anxiety that can be just as real and just as debilitating in a dog as it is in a human being. You might have noticed that your dog tends to bark more when you are about to leave, or when you have been gone for a while, or when there are certain sounds in the environment that seem to trigger something deep inside them. That is not your dog misbehaving. That is your dog in a state of emotional distress, using the only tool they have to express it. Separation anxiety in particular is something that affects a huge number of dogs, and it tends to get worse the more strongly bonded a dog is to their owner, which, yes, means that the dogs who love their people the most can sometimes suffer the most when those people leave. There is something quietly heartbreaking about that when you really sit with it. Your dog is not barking at the walls when you go to work because they are being dramatic. They are barking because they genuinely do not know if you are coming back. They do not have the concept of, my human will return in 8 hours. All they know is that the person who is their entire world has disappeared, and that is terrifying. So, what do you actually do about this? The solution here requires patience, and I want to be honest with you about that because quick fixes do not work for anxiety. What does work is something called desensitization. This means you very gradually, over time, teach your dog that your departures are not a big deal. You start tiny. You put on your coat, pick up your keys, and then just sit back down. Do nothing. Do that repeatedly until your dog stops reacting to those triggers. Then you step outside for 10 seconds and come back. Then 30 seconds. Then 2 minutes. You are essentially reprogramming the emotional association your dog has with departure cues, and you are doing it in such small increments that their nervous system never gets the chance to spike into panic. It takes time. It can take weeks, But it is the only real solution for separation anxiety, because you are not just managing the behavior, you are actually healing the emotional wound underneath it. And along the way, you can support your dog with puzzle feeders or long-lasting chews right before you leave, which redirect their mental energy and create a positive association with your departure. Some owners find that leaving a piece of worn clothing with their scent also helps, because scent is the most powerful sensory anchor for dogs. They do not just smell your shirt, they feel your presence through it. Now let us move into the second major reason, which is territorial barking. And this one is extremely common and often wildly mishandled. Dogs are, at their core, social animals with a deep instinct to protect their perceived territory. When your dog stands at the window and goes absolutely berserk every time someone walks past, or barks furiously at the mail carrier day after day, they are doing exactly what evolution built them to do. They are sounding an alarm. They are telling the intruder, in no uncertain terms, that this is their space. The problem is that from your dog's perspective, this works perfectly every single time. Think about it from their point of view. They see the mail carrier, they bark their head off, and the mail carrier leaves every single day. In your dog's mind, that is a direct causal link. They barked, the threat retreated. So of course they keep doing it, because it is, from their perspective, one of the most successful behaviors in their entire repertoire. This is where management and training have to work together. Management means limiting the visual access your dog has to these triggers. If your dog goes into a barking frenzy every time they see movement through the front window, consider using frosted window film on the lower portion of the glass, or simply blocking access to that area during the hours when triggers are most frequent. This is not a permanent fix, but it stops the rehearsal. Every time your dog successfully performs the barking routine, that neural pathway gets stronger. The fewer times they rehearse it, the weaker that pathway becomes, and the more room you have to teach a new one. The new pathway you want to teach is what trainers call an incompatible behavior. You want your dog to do something that physically cannot happen at the same time as barking. For most dogs, this is a go-to-your-place cue, teaching your dog to go to a specific bed or mat and lie down on command. When the mail carrier comes, instead of letting the barking spiral happen, you interrupt early before the peak of arousal and redirect to the mat. You reward heavily. Over many repetitions, your dog begins to build a new habit. Stranger appears. I go to my mat. Good things happen. It feels almost too simple, but the repetition is the magic. You are not punishing the old behavior. You are making the new behavior so rewarding that it begins to crowd the old one out. There is a third reason for excessive barking that does not get nearly enough attention, and I think it is one of the most important ones for modern dog owners to understand. Boredom. Deep, profound, unmet mental and physical need. Dogs were not bred to lie around apartments for 16 hours a day. Many of the breeds people keep as pets were originally designed for demanding physical work, herding, hunting, guarding, retrieving, and those dogs have brains and bodies that desperately need something to do. When that need is chronically unmet, barking often becomes the outlet, not because the dog is trying to be difficult, but because their system is essentially overloaded with unexpressed energy. You might have noticed that your dog barks more on days when they have been inside all day versus days when they have had a long walk or a good play session. That is not a coincidence. That is a direct reflection of their internal state. A tired dog, genuinely tired, not just physically walked, but mentally stimulated, is almost always a quieter dog. And this is where a lot of owners get surprised, because they think they are giving their dog enough exercise when really, physical exercise alone often is not enough. Mental enrichment is just as important, sometimes more so. A 10-minute sniff walk where your dog gets to freely explore smells at their own pace can be more tiring than a 30-minute brisk walk on a tight leash. Sniffing activates the brain in a way that walking simply does not, and for a dog, processing. All those olfactory signals is genuinely exhausting in the best possible way. Add to that puzzle feeders, training sessions, hide and seek with treats or toys, and you have a dog whose brain is getting the workout it was built for. When that cup is filled, there is simply less overflow in the form of unnecessary barking. Training. Sessions deserve special mention here because they do double duty. They tire your dog out mentally and they strengthen your communication with each other. Even 5 to 10 minutes a day of working on basic cues, tricks, or new skills gives your dog a sense of purpose, keeps their brain engaged, and deepens the bond between you. A dog who has a strong training relationship with their owner also tends to be more responsive when you ask them to stop barking, because the channel of communication between you is clearer and more trusted. Now I want to talk about something that many owners either overlook or actively resist, and that is the role of your own emotional state in your dog's barking. This one can be uncomfortable to hear, so stay with me. Dogs are extraordinarily tuned in to human emotion. They have co-evolved with us for tens of thousands of years, and in that time, they have developed an almost supernatural ability to read our body language, our tone of voice, our breathing patterns, and even our scent when we are stressed. When you are anxious, they feel it. When you are tense, they absorb it. When you are frustrated, it actually raises their arousal level. So when your dog is barking and you respond with your own heightened energy, sharp voice, tense body, rushing toward them, you are essentially telling them in dog language that there is absolutely something to be concerned about. You are confirming the alarm rather than dismissing it. This does not mean you have to be a Zen master every moment of your life, but it does mean that consciously working to stay calm and grounded when your dog is in a barking episode makes a genuine, measurable difference. Take a breath. Relax your shoulders. Lower your voice instead of raising it. Move slowly and deliberately. Your dog is watching all of this, and your calm becomes their permission to calm down too. There is a technique here that many trainers recommend, and that works remarkably well once you get the feel for it. And that is what some call the bore them into quiet method. When your dog is barking at something that is not a genuine threat, you simply do nothing. No eye contact, no voice, no movement toward them. You become the most boring thing in the room. This removes the social reward from the equation entirely. For dogs who are barking partly to get your attention, this can work quite quickly. For dogs whose barking is more deeply driven by anxiety or territorial instinct, it needs to be combined with the other strategies we have already talked about. But the principle of removing your own emotional fuel from the fire is always relevant, regardless of the underlying cause. Let us also address reactivity toward other dogs, because this is something a huge number of owners struggle with, especially on walks. Your dog sees another dog, and before you can even register what is happening, they are lunging, barking, pulling on the leash, and you are standing there feeling embarrassed, exhausted, and honestly a little helpless. Here is what you need to understand about on-leash reactivity specifically. The leash itself is part of the problem. When a dog cannot move freely, they lose their natural ability to use body language to communicate with other dogs. They cannot turn away. They cannot create distance. They cannot use all the subtle signals they would normally use to manage a social interaction. The frustration of that constraint, combined with the heightened arousal of seeing another dog, can very quickly boil over into barking and lunging. The solution is a concept called threshold management, and it changes everything once you understand it. Every dog has a threshold, a distance from a trigger at which they can still think, still respond to you, still function rationally. Beyond that threshold, the emotional brain takes over, and the thinking brain essentially goes offline. Your job, especially in the early stages of working on reactivity, is to keep your dog below threshold as much as possible. This means crossing the street before another dog gets too close. It means creating more space, always more space than you think you need. It means watching your dog like a hawk for the early subtle signals that their arousal is starting to rise. the stiffening of the body, the intense forward stare, the ears going up, and intervening before they tip over the edge. At that manageable distance, you work on building a new association. Dog appears in the distance, you mark it with a cheerful yes or a click if you use a clicker, and immediately follow with something your dog genuinely loves: a piece of chicken, a piece of cheese, a beloved toy. Over time, with enough repetitions, your dog begins to form a new emotional response to the sight of another dog. Instead of alarm and frustration, they start to feel something more like anticipation of good things. The technical term for this is counter-conditioning. The result, when it works, is genuinely remarkable to witness. Dogs who were once reactive wrecks on leash begin to see other dogs and look up at their owner instead, waiting for the treat, calm and connected. Now I want to address something very practical that trips a lot of owners up, and that is inconsistency. Inconsistency is, hands down, one of the biggest saboteurs of any training plan for excessive barking. You spend a week being really good, staying calm, not reacting, redirecting, rewarding quiet. And then you have a hard day. You are tired. And your dog goes into a barking episode and you just snap. You yell, you react, and in that one moment, you have potentially reset a significant amount of the progress you made. Not because yelling is so catastrophically damaging, but because dogs learn through patterns, and inconsistency makes patterns impossible to read. Think of it this way. If you went to press the button for an elevator and sometimes it worked and sometimes it did not, you would press it more frantically, not less. The unpredictability itself makes you try harder. The same is true for dogs. If barking sometimes gets a reaction and sometimes gets nothing, they will actually bark more persistently, trying to find the version of barking that gets the response. Consistency, from everyone in the household at all times, is what allows your dog to make a clear and confident connection between their behavior and the outcome. That clarity is what produces real change. This means having a house conversation. If you are working on not reacting to barking, every person in your home needs to be on the same page. One person who cannot resist engaging when the dog barks can undo the efforts of everyone else. It is not about blame. It is just about understanding that your dog is reading all of you all the time, and a consistent environment is a learnable one. I also want to speak briefly about the tools that are sometimes marketed as quick solutions to excessive barking: citronella collars, shock collars, ultrasonic devices. I am not going to go on a long rant here, but I do want to be direct with you because you deserve honesty. These tools can sometimes suppress the behavior in the moment, but they do not address the underlying cause. A dog who is barking out of anxiety does not become less anxious when startled by a spray or a shock. They often become more anxious, and sometimes the barking shifts into something else: destructive behavior, aggression, or a kind of learned helplessness where the dog becomes shut down and disengaged. The suppression of a symptom is not the same as healing the cause, and in the case of anxiety-driven barking, forcing suppression can genuinely make things worse over time. What actually works consistently, humanely, and in a lasting way is the combination of things we have been talking about. Understanding the root cause, reducing the exposure to triggers while you work on changing the emotional association with those triggers, meeting your dog's mental and physical needs in a real and meaningful way, building a communication system through positive training, and showing up with patience and consistency over time. None of this is complicated in concept. The complexity is in the doing of it, day after day, even when progress feels slow. And here I want to say something important about the pace of change. Dogs learn quickly in some ways and slowly in others. Behaviors that have a long history, things your dog has been doing for months or years, take longer to shift than new behaviors. You might work on this for 3 weeks and feel like nothing is changing, and then suddenly in week 4, something clicks. That is real. That happens. And it happens because of all the quiet, unglamorous work you put in during those 3 weeks when it did not look like anything was happening. The progress is often invisible right up until it is not. There is also a category of excessive barking that is worth mentioning, and that is barking that has a medical or aging-related cause. Older dogs especially can begin barking more as a result of cognitive dysfunction syndrome, which is similar to dementia in humans. They may bark at night, seem confused, or bark at things that are not there. This is not a training problem. This is a medical condition. And if your older dog has shown a sudden increase in barking combined with other changes like confusion, disorientation, or disrupted sleep patterns, a conversation with your vet is genuinely important. Pain can also drive barking in dogs of any age. A dog who is hurting may bark or whine as an expression of discomfort. If the barking is new and there has been no obvious behavioral trigger, please do not skip the vet visit. Rule out the physical before focusing on the behavioral. For younger dogs, especially puppies, it is also worth acknowledging that some of what looks like excessive barking is simply developmental. Puppies are learning to use their voice, learning about the world, learning what gets responses and what does not. The habits you build, or fail to build, in the early months of a puppy's life have an enormous impact on the dog they become. If you are reading this with a young dog, you have a genuine gift in front of you, the chance to shape these patterns before they solidify. Invest in that now, with patience and consistency, and you will save yourself an enormous amount of frustration down the road. I also want to give you one more thing before we close, and it is something that tends to get glossed over in these conversations. Relationship. The quality of the relationship between you and your dog affects how they feel in the world and therefore how they behave in it. Dogs who feel genuinely safe, understood, and connected with their person tend to be calmer, more confident, and more resilient when faced with the things that would otherwise trigger that anxious, compulsive barking. That safety is built in small moments, the times you get on the floor and just be with them, the times you notice their communication before it escalates, the times you advocate for them by crossing the street before another dog makes them uncomfortable, the times you choose patience over frustration even when it is hard. You are not just training your dog to stop barking. You are building a relationship rooted in trust, and that relationship is the thing that makes every other part of this work. A dog who trusts you does not need to alarm bark as desperately because they believe you will handle it. A dog who feels understood does not need to push their communication to extremes because the quieter signals have been heard. A dog who is genuinely connected to their person has a fundamental sense of security that changes how they experience the world. So, here is where I want to leave you. Your dog's barking, however exhausting it has been, is not an act of defiance. It is an act of communication. It is your dog doing the very best they can with the tools they have, trying to navigate a world that is sometimes confusing, sometimes overwhelming, and sometimes genuinely frightening for them. And you, by being here, by wanting to understand, instead of just wanting it to stop, have already done something extraordinary. You have chosen empathy over frustration. That is not a small thing. Go home or stay on that couch and look at your dog. Really look at them, not as a problem to be solved, but as a being who loves you more completely and unconditionally than almost anything else in your life ever will. The barking is a chapter in your story together, not the whole story. And the next chapter, the one where you understand each other a little better, where the communication is clearer, where the trust runs deeper, that chapter starts right now.